Good evening. The Design Review Board public meeting of July 23rd, 2020 is called to order. Mr. Chair, would you like to make a quick comment about future meetings?
Sure. Thank you. Fellow board members, in future hearings, we no longer will be calling in the way we have been doing, so this is just for the board members. We're going to be using a new system called WebEx, and staff is going to, provide us with information in the next week or so, I would imagine. But next time around, we will log in via WebEx.
Okay, thank you. Due to the COVID-19 novel coronavirus and health recommendations from the LA County Health Department, the Design Review Board meeting is being conducted public virtually with no members of the public present. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. The meeting can be viewed on local cable TV and is being streamlined online at the city's website at www.glendaleca.gov. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. City staff will be submitting the questions and comments in real time to the appropriate person. Current DRB agendas are available by visiting our website at www.glendaleca.gov. Records of decisions for all projects will be posted online on the Planning Division's website. Please note that any appeal of a case heard today must be filed within 15 calendar days of the DRB decision date. The appeal application is also available online. The chairperson may reorder agenda items at his or her discretion. Roll call. Board Member Azumanian.
Present.
Joining by phone. Thank you. Board Member Smith.
Present.
Thank you. Joining by phone. Board Member Welch.
Present.
Thank you. Joining by phone. Chairperson Simonian.
Present?
Thank you. Regarding posting and report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on July 20th, 2020. Approval of minutes. Are there any comments regarding the approval of minutes for June 25th, 2020?
Board members?
I move we approve the minutes. This is Board Member Welch.
Okay,
I
that
second it.
was a motion by Board Member Welch, and was that a second by Board Member Smith?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So motion to approve the June 25th, 2020 minutes. Oral communications. Any individuals wishing to speak on an item that is not part of today's agenda? Are there any cards or anyone on the line, rather?
No oral communication at this point.
Okay. So at this time,
Did Mr. Platt want to make a comment?
yes, Mr. Platt, you wanted to make a comment earlier?
Yes, just following up on a discussion we had at the last board meeting where Board Member Smith inquired about the requirements for solar panel installation on single-family residences. We have clarification, and we appreciate Mrs. Smith helping us with that because we unfortunately hadn't even received an update about this, the new law. But it turns out that as we presented at the hearing, we have absolutely no design review authority or control about the installation, the locations, the appearance of solar panels, and that's mandated through the state law. So we may start seeing those more often on drawings, and we're just going to have to remember that we have to kind of pull that out of the discussion when we're going through our design review discussion. So thank you.
Point of whatever that's called. This is Board Member Smith. solar design is in Chapter 3 in the Hillside Design Guidelines, and I think in Chapter 2 of the other. And it talks, and the directive is design features must be fully integrated into the overall design of the structure.
Yeah, and
So I think it's more the building working with the panels than the panels working with the building.
that's actually not the case. When that was written, that was designed to discuss issues like the orientation of buildings, things like sunscreens, canopies, perhaps eave overhangs. It was not intended for solar panels, and even if it were, the state law would supersede that. So we are completely unable to review the design of solar panel installations. The only exemption from that will be for our historic properties that have Mills Act contracts.
I think
In
you're
which case, the board
misinterpreting what
wouldn't be
I'm
looking at
saying.
those. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think you're misinterpreting what I'm saying. What the design guidelines address is to provide for passive solar design, and that the design features should be fully integrated into the overall design, so it won't be as it has been where they are often added after or an afterthought. So I'm not saying the solar panels need to be integrated into the design. What I'm saying is the design needs to be integrated into the solar panel concept.
I believe that's a misinterpretation of the state law, but what we can do is get clarification from our city attorney's office and bring that back to the board at the next hearing.
Great, thank you very much.
So with that, Ms. Toledo, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So the first and only item on today's agenda is the project located at 2941 through 2943 Honolulu Avenue. It is a new multifamily 18-unit project. It involves the demolition of the existing approximately 4,600 square foot two-story commercial building built in 1983, and a surface parking lot in conjunction with the construction of a new 3-story, 18-unit, 18,493 square foot multifamily residential building over a 23-space semi-subterranean parking garage located on a 13,299 square foot lot located in the C1 neighborhood commercial zone. Now, per the code for multiple residential dwelling units located in the C1 zone, they are permitted, residential is permitted in compliance with the R1250 high density residential development standards. A little bit of background on this project. Earlier in the year, there was a conditional use permit that was approved to allow multifamily dwellings on the ground floor of the proposed project because it is located in the C1 zone. On February 14th of 2020, the Director of Community Development approved with conditions a density bonus, housing plans, and findings for 3 concessions were made because at least 15% of the base number of units are being reserved for very low income households. These concessions are as follows. One was to increase the maximum allowed floor area ratio to 1.4, increase the maximum height and number of stories to 42 feet 3 inches and 3 stories, and reduce the required parking by 7 spaces. There's a 7-space shortfall. If there are any questions regarding the density bonus and associated concessions, we do have our city attorney, Yvette Nukian, on the line available if there are any questions regarding the density bonus. So moving on with the design review. These are images of the existing property, which I discussed what the existing building is. It's currently vacant, but it was originally occupied by retail, a tavern on the ground floor, and then offices above. The lot gradually slopes upward from Honolulu towards the rear of the site. And let's discuss a little bit about the site planning. The building provides appropriate setback and averages for the front and interior property lines for residential developments in compliance with our 1250 standards. It will provide landscape planters throughout the perimeter of the lot, including at the rear and adjacent to the public alley. Each unit also features private balconies or patios. Common areas are proposed on the ground level and at the sides and rear and at the roof deck. Staff recommends either enlarging the central courtyard area. There's a comment that I'd like to emphasize as I move along in the report. But these are also included as part of the conditions. But staff does recommend either enlarging the central courtyard to introduce better light and common areas at appropriate locations, or eliminating the small open space in this area in favor of increased outdoor area. As stated, they are proposing a semi-subterranean parking garage for residential units accessed from Honolulu Avenue. There will not be vehicular access from the alley. The only type of access from there would be pedestrian access for the residents to access the property, but no vehicular access from the alley to the building. Now, in terms of quickly about the semi-subterranean garage, there is a difference between some semi-subterranean, because if it exceeds more than 4.5 feet above grade, that's considered semi-sub. It's still an underground parking, but just by definition, it's different than what's a fully subterranean parking, where it does not extend above ground. So that's the distinction in the code. But it will be underground parking, providing the 23 spaces. As far as landscaping, the city's urban forestry did review the project and will require improvements to the street planter space within the right-of-way and the installation of new street trees in this location, which will be further evaluated and determined by the city's urban forestry section. But the project does comply with the minimum 25% for landscaping on site. Regarding the walls on the property, they are providing CMU walls ranging in height from 6 to 6.5 feet, perimeter walls on the site, which does comply with code. The rear of the property will have, again, a wall and a pedestrian access gate to and from the alley. The design and materials of the fence and wall are compatible with the design. However, a condition is included to ensure that tall vertical landscaping is introduced at the rear, adjacent to the rear boundary wall, in order to screen and soften the tall wall adjacent to the alley. So facing the property or the residence, due to the height or the elevation difference in height, slope, and topography of this property, the height of the wall at the rear facing the subject site will be taller compared to the alley side. For this reason, staff is recommending some additional tall vegetation in this area to soften the wall. As far as the building mass in this section, as I move forward, so the area surrounding the project site does contain a mix of uses, including commercial uses across the street to the south. We have one-story commercial buildings directly adjacent to the project site on the east and west, and 1- and 2-story multifamily residential further east and west along Honolulu Avenue. And there are 1-story single-family residential developments with detached garages located across the alley to the north. The proposed project, again, is located along Honolulu Avenue, which has an approximate 90 to 100 foot right-of-way. That includes sidewalk and on-street parking, and 4 lanes total. So the project's mass and scale, we've noted in the report, is appropriate and integrates with the surrounding commercial multifamily buildings. The design of the roof it is flat, and it has a parapet roof and will feature a roof deck at the southwest corner of the building. As far as the design and detailings, the development features a modern style that employs a variety of geometric patterns and elements and treatments. The building features a variety of colors and combinations, both stucco and cladding, siding. However, a condition is included to introduce additional cladding at appropriate locations throughout the building, and that includes the sides and the rear, to provide better distribution of the materials to enhance and articulate the building facades. The front entry design lacks interest and appropriate focal point. The front entry appears to resemble that of a commercial storefront design rather than a residential entry. And the proposed lift at the front of the building does not complement the front facade, and I've highlighted in on my slide the location of the lift facing Honolulu Avenue. So staff is recommending a condition to redesign and enhance the front entry of the building by designing an interesting focal point entrance and to remove the lift at the front. Staff recommends creating perhaps a pedestrian ramp, or lowering the lobby floor elevation, relocating the lift to the interior of the building. All the residential windows are proposed to be dark fiberglass windows, and we are suggesting a condition to have the applicant submit window sections depicting opening in the stucco clad and siding clad wall, and also for a window schedule. In terms of the finish materials and colors, I mentioned earlier that there is a variety of finishes, including the smooth stucco finish with a thin reglet throughout, fiber cement siding, metal railings, the metal roof, and dark brown fiberglass doors and windows. These materials are consistent with the chosen style. A condition is suggested to submit drawing details of all junctions where different materials intersect, and also including corner details where the materials turn the corners. So I've mentioned most of the conditions, but there are 11, and they are in your staff report. I didn't go through all of them one by one, but if you'd like, I can do that. Mr. Chair, would you like me to go through all 11 conditions?
Board members, do you have a preference, or does everybody have it on their screens at home?
I have them. I don't need her to go through all of them.
Okay,
I agree.
very good. And in the spirit of time, I think we'll just then move on, because I know one of the board members has a 6:45 hard stop, so we'll try to accommodate her schedule. So with that, then we'll go ahead and open the public portion of the hearing. And we have the applicant, Garo.
Mr. Chair?
Yes? Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Can I ask a question? Since,
Yeah, of course.
We have the city attorney here, and I did want to ask about this, some density bonus issues. Specifically, what discretion, if any, do we have to actually reduce the size, given the density bonus, the concessions that were provided?
Hello, board members of Design Review Board. I'm Yvette Nukian from the Glendale City Attorney's Office, Senior Assistant City Attorney, here to answer that question. So under the state density bonus law, the Design Review Board has design discretion. However, any of the conditions or the redesign that you might impose cannot reduce the density, overall density of the project, and it cannot eliminate or reduce the concessions that were granted. So there's lots of different ways you can have design review discretion, but unfortunately you are constrained by those two things. You cannot reduce the overall density, and you cannot eliminate the concessions. Another thing I would caution is there's another state law called the Housing Accountability Act, which also states that anytime a city denies or makes infeasible a housing development project or reduces its density, it must make specific findings of adverse impact. So that's another way that we have to really be careful in, or the design review board has to be careful in the conditions that it imposes. Happy to answer any follow-ups.
Hi, Ms. Manukian. This is Board Member Smith. According to my fantastic arithmetic, it looks like the density bonus afforded 2.7 additional units as very low income. Is that your understanding? It's approximately 3 units?
The 3 units were the affordable units. The overall density bonus was 35% of the base density, and I believe that allowed, maybe Ms. Toledo can answer that, but I think that allowed more than 3 units.
Thank you.
Ms. Toledo?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm getting to that page right
Yeah,
now.
she's looking it up, so it might take a moment to answer that question.
So I'm reading from page 2 of the decision letter, and it says, the applicant, well, let me start from the beginning. It says the zoning code permits additional density for every 1,000 square feet of lot area because the frontage is more than 90 feet wide. Based on this provision, 4 additional units are allowed by right by bringing the total allowable base density to 13.2 units, which according to density bonus law must be rounded up to 14. However, the applicant is requesting that the city apply a base density of 13 for purposes of calculating density bonus of 35%, which allows 5 additional units above the base density for a total of 18 units. The city is required to apply the base density of 14 for purposes of calculating the required number of affordable units. Therefore, the applicant will be required to designate 3 of the rental units for very low income households. That would be 15% of the 14 base density units, 2.1 rounded up to 3.
So just to summarize, thank you, Ms. Toledo. So just to summarize that, what that means is the base density is 14, which is calculated based on the R1250 standards. And for purposes of density bonus, the applicant is actually building less density than they're allowed. But for purposes of the affordable housing requirement, they are building the required 3 units.
And just one follow-up, just to be clear, so the concession that was provided for FAR was 1.40?
1.4, correct.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions for staff or the city attorney? Ms. Manukian, I have one follow-up question as well in regards to the calculation of the affordable units. So the 15%, does that get applied to, and I know you mentioned this earlier, or Ms. Toledo might have mentioned it, but I didn't quite grab it. Does the 15% get applied to the total units proposed, or is it the base number of units allowed under the code?
It's the base number of units allowed under the code. So I believe that number is 14.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 14. 14 times 15% is 2.1, which gets rounded up to 3.
That is correct.
Okay. And has that state code section changed in the last few years? And is this specific project based on an older set of codes? Because at some point recently, I was under the impression that the 15% is applied to the total number of units. Am I just mistaken, or has the code changed since this applicant went through the process?
The code has changed, but not changed. The only thing that's changed that are irrelevant to this project. But the calculation has always been based on the base density.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that and for your time. It might be best if you could maybe stay with us, at least until the public portion of the hearing gets by. This way, if we have any other additional questions, we could refer to your guidance.
Certainly.
Okay. Well, I think I heard earlier that none of the board members had any additional questions. So with that, we'll go ahead then and open the public portion. Our first speaker is the applicant. And so with that, I'm going to invite Garo Nazarian. Mr. Nazarian, if you would please state your name for the record, and if you have your television or computer on in the background, please mute it so there won't be a delay when you're speaking to us. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Nazarian, are you there? I have a green.
Can you hear
Yes,
me? I am here.
Yes, please. If you would mute your television or your computer in the background, so there
The
won't be.
television is mute, you know. Yeah, I'm just talking on the phone.
Wonderful.
Mr.
You're on the
Chair.
air. Please state your name for the record. And
Garo Nazarian with the Domus Design, the
um,
designer of the project.
great, Mr. Nazarian, if you would just hold on 1 second, staff would like to mention something, which I believe we're going to have them do at this point. So just hang on with us for a
Just
second.
really briefly,
Ms. Polito.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to bring to your attention and the board members, as you are aware, we've received several letters in opposition to this project. So I just wanted, for the record, to show that we have those letters. You were forwarded those letters today. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Great. Yes, and we have received the emails, and some were earlier and some today, so thank you for that clarification. Mr. Nazarian, you have the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the project as presented is on a C1 zone with a lot area of the 13,000 to 300 square feet, which the residential use is allowed on the C1 zone on the ground floor with the CUP. This project has gone to the CUP meeting, and the CUP, it has been approved, the ground use residential unit. And we are using the state law, the SB 1818, you know, for with the incentives and the one waiver of the waiver and modification to building standards to come with the 18 units apartment building, which the project is consist of the 12 two-bedroom units, 3 one-bedroom units, and 3 single studios. The project complies with all the zoning code, Glendale zoning ordinance, and we are using the SB 1818 incentives at the waiver for this project. This project is the SB 1818 indicates if there is a transit within 1,500 square feet of the 1,500 feet of the project, the parking requirement is 1 per unit, but we do have a line 9091, which is about 1,000 feet from the property, but we are not using that 1 parking per unit. We are asking the waiver to provide 1 parking space for the 1 bedroom and the singles, and 1.4 parking spaces for the 2 bedrooms. And the design is done, based on the zoning coordinates. The ground floor, the first residential floor, is required to have a 5 feet minimum, 8 feet average setback. The second floor, 8 feet, 11 average. But this project, because we are believed to the lifestyle and the giving more open spaces for living, this project, it has been designed with the minimum 11 feet side setback to provide more open space, and the rear setback, which is again 5 feet minimum, 8 feet average, we designed from the first floor 15 feet rear setback. And by considering these additional open spaces, the setbacks that we provide, of course, the building is articulated, but not as much as, that on the side we have articulation by the 2 feet, but on the rear of the property facing to alley, we have articulation of some points 3 feet, 6 feet, and 9 feet articulation. And this project in front of you is a result of the almost 10 months or about maybe 1 year working with the design studio group, having received comments from them and responding to the comments, we come to this final design, which, as you see on the staff recommendation, is approval, which is appropriate design with providing nice and quality life for the future residents of the building. And I did go over the conditions of the approvals. I don't have a problem with most of them, but I have concern about 2 items, which one is the enlarged interior court for the more ventilation and light. By reviewing the plans, you can see that this project could be considered as an interior corridor project, but providing that just the open to sky area with the landscape area to enhance, and as much as we can, the path of travel from the front entry area to the unit. So that, and reviewing the plans, you see that all the units, they have windows on the exterior walls. All the bedrooms or the living rooms, they have windows to the exterior, on the exterior walls, and they are receiving light and ventilation. They don't need that interior court for the ventilation and light. So that is one concern. The other concern is the lift, handicap lift that we have to provide. That going with the handicap ramp, it's doable. But because I have about 24 to 26 inch this level from street level to the first residential floor, maybe I will need about 36 linear feet of the ramp with the railings. But as the project is designed, you see that the lift, where the lift it is, in the front of it, I have the landscape area. With the landscaping, I can barricade the street view of the lift. So we can hide that lift from the street view. But anyway, even the ramp could be done. It's not impossible. But as a designer of the project, I will prefer to go with this lift. And the others, there are some comments which I did receive. The last comments I received, that articulation or more siding on the side of the building, which I responded. But again, I will work with the staff to accommodate all these comments as much as possible. And the vertical landscaping, all the perimeter walls on the alley side and the building the east and the west side, we are proposing on the landscaping plans the ivy, which it covers the block wall and it gives the green wall for the entire open space around the building. And the other comments, of course, I have to go to the street tree department to satisfy their needs. What they ask, I will provide it. I have no objection about any other condition. And front entry, again, for this style of the architecture, I believe that is the appropriate design. But again, I can work with the staff to change it and to get their satisfaction for the entry area. And the other items, I don't have any other problems, but I don't think so. And the building height, we are using the incentives because on this C1 zone, a 25 feet height limit is established for the C1 zone, but by using the incentives, I can have one more story or 12 feet, which it goes to 37 feet, and the maximum height of 40-something, that is in the top of the stairway and the elevator shaft, because we do have the common outdoor space on the rooftop. Then for the access, I have to provide this stairway and the elevator to have access to rooftop deck. And but the height of the building to the top of the parapet wall, it complies with the code, and this project doesn't need any variance or any other modification. We comply with the code, and the project is done by the right. No additional variances is needed. At this time, I don't know, because I did receive the letters of the neighboring, properties. I don't know if this time to respond it or in the rebuttal time.
It's better that you respond in the rebuttal time. And,
Okay.
And unless you have no more comments, we're going to see if the board members have any questions for you. And if not, then we'll move on to the homeowner, to the
No, I'm
public.
done with my presentation.
Okay.
If there is any other question, I will be more than happy to answer it.
Great, thank you. Board members, do we have any questions for the applicant? Okay, since there was silence, I assume the answer is no. So with that,
You couldn't hear me. Sorry, this is Board Member Smith.
yes, I'm sorry, Board Member Smith, we were unable to hear you. Go ahead.
Thanks, sorry. I'm curious, just offhand, when we're looking at it right now, what is the size of the smallest units there? And this is a question for the architect.
Okay, the smallest unit size, which are the studios, the smallest size of the unit, it's let me go through my record. It's the studio unit. It's 583 square feet. The smallest is 583 square feet, which is a studio.
Okay, and thank you. And are only the affordable units the studios?
No. I have reached agreement with the housing department. I'm providing 1 2-bedroom, 1 single, 1 1-bedroom, one unit of each type, which already
thank you very
the
much.
document it has been reached and signed.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Nazarian. Board Member Smith, any other questions?
I don't. Thank you very much.
Okay. Other board members, any other questions for the designer applicant?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, Mr. Nazarian, go ahead and hold on if you would, and we're going to move on to other speakers. Mr. Basmatian, you're on the air. If you would please introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, thanks. Tigran Basmagia.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Go ahead, sir.
I appreciate the time, and I just wanted to give a little backdrop on the property and really give some context as to when we bought it a few years ago. As staff mentioned, this was a tavern. It was a sports bar, All Stars, if the name lingers in your memory. And we bought it, thought about what we would do with it. So one of the options was, obviously keep it bar-driven, restaurant-driven. There was a lot of talk a few years ago about the housing shortage, specifically affordable. So one of the things in working with our architect was, hey, what are our options? And this came up as a, cause-driven solution to really build in a way that would also add value to the local community. So we felt really good about it. In the last couple of years, we've been very active working with staff to, come up with a design that would, provide some relevance to the neighboring community and, provide young families with, great, as Gara talked about, a great, option as far as staying local in the community. And so that's really the backdrop as to kind of how this whole thing evolved. I know there was a little bit of opposition recently in the last couple of days that might have surfaced around height or about parking. What I would say to just comment there in anticipation of opposition would be, if we kept this thing a bar, 10 or 15 of my employees parked in the outdoor lot, leaving maybe 5 spaces, and the spillover of 50 or 60 or 70 patrons hit the streets, and that would be less than ideal. So this would provide probably a better outcome from that standpoint. Height, if we go the SB 1818 affordable route, we're going the 3rd story, due in large part to the affordable spillover, which, as far as the way we looked at it, 3 stories is not a skyscraper, but it also allows 3 families an opportunity to, really have that quality of life in our higher than, cost of living environment with opportunity that city would select applicants that would make sense, that would be based on that lottery system of how this whole thing is designed. So the alternative would be obviously building it as is to maximize cash flow. Yes, we were given some concessions, but those concessions, cost to benefit, are very comparable to the alternative to take the path of least resistance and either keep it a bar or, residential. So we already have our CUP, and we want to be able to supply the market with more affordable solutions. And so the height, for somebody who would be in opposition of that, who maybe drives by and would prefer it to be a 2-unit, maybe could find comfort in knowing that 3 families have an opportunity to live within their means and have affordable housing. So all of that being said, we appreciate the consideration, and I want to thank staff for their time throughout the last couple of years, and I want to thank the board in advance for consideration and for approval. And that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before I move on to the next speaker, I had a question for staff. Because this lot is wider than 90 feet, although it's a C1 zone property, the R1250 design guide, zoning rules would apply, in which case it allows for 3 stories anyways. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so where usually you have SB 1818 projects that ask for a height concession where it goes from 3 floors to 4 floors, this applicant is not asking for that, but use different concessions such as the FAR, the parking, and the other items that you went over.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. All right. So with that, I'm going to move on to another neighbor, Frank Cross. And I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, sir. Frank Carotz, you're on the air. If you would introduce yourself and state your name for the record. Go ahead.
Frank Carraz. Don't worry about the pronunciation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the group today.
You're welcome. You have
I'm
3
the
minutes.
homeowner
You have
who's
3
going to come out
minutes,
my
sir.
backyard when this project is done. And instead of seeing mountains, I look up at a 42-foot wall. And that's really unattractive. I'm going to address some of the zoning issues I have. I know the permits have been granted. The density bonus kind of rules this project. But I want to express my opinion. I opposed the matter when it was at the conditional use permit level and submitted a letter. But my issues are not with having residents on the first floor. My issue is with the density of the project. And the density of the project, I just heard the owner speak about how altruistic he is and he wants to do affordable housing. And I think that's great. But the density of this project is because they don't want to incur the cost of digging down for subterranean parking. They could lower the first level to below ground level like they did on the property 2 doors to the west that the city of Glendale permitted a housing complex. I don't know how many units are there, but they didn't have to exceed the height requirement. And I assume it was an economically successful project. But here you've got an existing building of 4,600 square feet, and you're allowing, the city has allowed more than 4 times that, 18,493. The height allowed by the city's zoning laws is 25 feet. Now, I've heard a couple contradictions here today and listening to all this, saying that it could be 3 stories because of some addition, because of the 90 foot, greater than 90 foot, but in all the reports it hasn't said that. It's talked about the fact that the 90 foot gives a permission for an increase in the number of units. The number of units under the city zoning is 10. There's a way that they calculate an additional 4, and then the density bonus gets them to 18. Now, that's a really dense housing project on a small lot. This is clearly non-conforming. And the motivation here appears to be, I guess, to give 3 people some affordable housing, which is great. I applaud that. But it really is to get a large 18-unit apartment complex on a property that can't support it. That property is not the size that supports that kind of a building or density, and that's what the city's zoning laws require. So the city has ignored their own zoning laws. They're going with the density bonus, and they're allowing the extra height, which really is the primary objection I have. Can you imagine walking out your backyard and looking up at a 42-foot wall? Now, the architect said it's only 37 feet. Well, I'm glad for that shorter 5 feet, except then they're going to build a deck on top of it, which they don't include in the footage. They only include the stairwell, I guess, but that's going to be more in the front part of it. So it's actually going to be higher because I think they talked about putting some kind of a shade cover at the top above it. Then we get to another real problem, and that's the parking. The city of Glendale has parking problems everywhere. The density in the city of Glendale, and let's focus on La Crescenta, the density has increased dramatically, and I'm sure all of you know that over the past 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. When I bought this house in 1975, you could park on the street. There was parking everywhere. You can't go down those streets in La Crescenta in that area, the residential parts of it, at 6 o'clock and find a parking spot. There's 2 cars. There's cars parked abreast all the way up and down the street, both sides. You can barely drive down it with a car. Kids can't play in the street. They can't ride their bikes in the street. There are no sidewalks there. And so what you're doing is the city has decided, well, they don't have to have enough parking. We're going to let them have 23 instead of 30. Even the 30, with the density of housing today in this world, where the economics are what they are, there are more than 1 car per household. There's usually 2, 3, 4. In the residential area of La Crescenta there, by my house, many of the households have 5 adults living in there with 5 cars. That's street parking. So now you're adding this parking. And the argument that was made earlier about having less people than when it was a bar, I lived there when it was a bar. The only problem we had when it was a bar was before they put the wall at the back where the alley is, the people used to come out of there drunk and run into the garages and the walls. And I even had people come from there that were drunk that went into my backyard and were having sex. I came out there one night and saw that. So they built the wall, and there was no problem. There was no problem with traffic. There was no problem with parking. there weren't all these employees parking in all the spaces, and there weren't all these people going to them. Now, maybe the owner could find a better business or a restaurant that would attract people. But after hours, at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, that's all that's going to be in there. The employees can use other parking. Anyway, I really object to what the city has done and what they have allowed here. I think they have failed the community drastically. They completely have disregarded the nature of the community. Montrose and La Crescenta is a small, picturesque community. We don't have buildings like that. Up on Montrose Avenue, there's apartments. Down on Honolulu, there are a few, not in these couple blocks from La Crescenta Avenue west to Pennsylvania. You don't have high-rise buildings like this. There's nothing that's 42 feet tall. The other parts that go to, I guess, your concern.
Oh, sir, I was just informed that I was just informed, sir, that you're way past the 3 minutes, and so with that, I'm going to have to cut you off because I think you've been probably a minute to a minute and a half over, and so with that, we'll take your points into consideration, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Okay, I appreciate that. Sir?
Sir? Well, I'm
Sir?
sorry. I'm going to have to.
Hello?
I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Nancy Giz.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Good evening. If you would just state your name for the record, thank you.
I can hardly hear you.
Good evening. Welcome. And if you would state your name for the record, and go ahead, ma'am. You're on the air.
Okay, my name is Nancy Giz. I'm the owner of the building at 2945 through 2953 Honolulu Avenue. I'm right next door, and I totally support the gentleman that spoke just prior to me, and parking being an issue with all of the density that is going to occur when this structure goes in. But my main concern is right now, if you build this building, will there be parking spaces large enough for pickup trucks, since many people drive them today? And hopefully there will be no tandem parking in this semi-subterranean parking. And then if you go forward with this, where are the trucks going to be parking during the construction period? Are they going to be parking in front of my building? Right now, I have 25 tenants, 25 businesses. I've owned this building for 38 years. And I have a very small parking lot in the back. Comfortably, about 4 cars can park there. So what I have for my 25 tenants is street parking, and as the prior gentleman spoke, we are slowly losing that, and I'm wondering, where are these businesses going to go? I need to have the parking in the front for my tenants as it has been up till now. And we've already lost some of that parking on Ramsdale with the condos that have gone in there. But still, my tenants are able to find street parking around, which are quickly diminishing. So I'm just mentioning this as an awareness that we need to be considered also, besides the residential business companies as well. And my office of 25 tenants, I don't want to lose them. And I don't think the community should lose them. And we will lose them if I lose my parking, because I have none.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have staff address your...
I can hardly hear you. I'm on my
Yep.
landline.
Thank you so much for your comments. After I hang up on you, with you, I'm going to have staff address your questions, okay? Thank you.
Thank
Ms. Toledo, 2 questions that the speaker brought up. One was if there was tandem parking at the property, or at the proposed project. And number 2 was, I guess, city's protocol as it deals with construction-related parking during the construction of the project.
Well, this project does not propose any tandem spaces.
Great.
So that clarifies that. And as it relates to parking during construction, I don't really have anything specific to add regarding that because there wouldn't be, to my knowledge, any specific requirements that planning would be imposing on parking.
And it isn't a planning division issue, but the Building and Safety Department, as part of their regulations for all construction projects, would be involved in that. So I'd encourage the caller to contact the Building and Safety Department to see if there are any provisions that they can offer or our Public Works team can offer in terms of parking during the time of construction. But it's something we just don't know about on our end.
And Mr. Chair, can I just add one comment that was brought up earlier about the height and number of stories? And I think to your point earlier, we understand that the building height and stories in terms of the C1 zone, the maximum height is 25 feet, which is a more restrictive standard compared to the 3 stories, 36 feet that would be allowed traditionally in our 1250 zone with a width frontage of 90 feet or more. We're going with the more restrictive standards, and that's how we're applying it. So on this lot, the maximum would be allowed would be the 25 feet.
But they have asked for one of their concessions through SB 1818 for an additional story.
Correct.
And that's the mandatory concession that we have no option at the city level to say no to. It's a requirement
Correct.
through the state law for the affordable housing.
I see.
And
Well,
if I could just jump in, I apologize, but minor clarification, the 3 were already granted in February and the appeal period has expired. So those 3 concessions are not being considered today. Those are already granted.
Correct.
Thank you. And so, thank you for that clarification, Ms. Toledo. So in the C1 zone, it's actually more restrictive
Exactly.
than the R1250 zone. And although in the R1250 zone, when you have a lot that's 90 feet or wider,
Correct.
you are able to go to 36 feet
Correct.
plus 5 feet if you have a pitch greater than 3 to
Yes.
12. In this specific scenario, since it's C1, the height really is only is restricted to 25 feet.
Correct.
But because of the SB 1818, one of the concessions was height. So thank you for clarifying that, and I wanted to also add some color to it as well, just so everyone that's listening in on the public side will be clear on the matter. With that, I'm going to move on to Mr. Grant Michaels. Mr. Michaels, you're on the air. If you would introduce yourself, and you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Good evening, Chair, board members, and staff. My name is Grant Michaels. I'm speaking tonight as the president of the Montrose Verdugo City Spar Heights Neighborhood Association and the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council. The North Glendale Community Plan brought together many in the community, including the neighborhood associations, city commissions, to develop meaningful guidelines for our community. The neighborhood associations support the goals of that plan in collaboration. The modern architectural style and design of this project does not fit with the North Glendale Community Plan. That plan values and embraces a rural suburban lifestyle, and this modern design is in contrast to that. The right angles, the boxy, massive appearance of the project do not fit with the character of the neighborhood. Looking at the mansard walls, which are straight, if those mansard walls were pitched, that would reduce the impact of the height from street level. Additionally, a true subterranean parking level would reduce the height of the building as viewed from the street and the surrounding neighborhoods, as well as eliminate the need for a lift or other accommodations at the entrance. I do want to go ahead and note that modern design projects in this area of Montrose, the North Glendale area in general, have failed. There were 2 projects that were proposed by the Olson Company, one on New York, one on Pennsylvania, with a very modern design. Those projects were not successful. Ganji came in with a proposal with a more rural design on Pennsylvania and successfully built those townhomes. The Mix project further to the east on Honolulu is an example of a successful collaboration with the developer and the community associations to develop a design that was supported by the neighborhood associations. In speaking for the Homeowners Coordinating Council, we have, along with our neighborhood associations, have long supported having the Design Review Board have design review authority in the downtown specific plan. As recently as July 7th, we submitted comments to City Council stating as much. This project is reminiscent of the big box apartments in the downtown specific plan. We're looking for your direction on this project to achieve the goals of the North Glendale Community Plan. This is an opportunity for the Design Review Board to demonstrate the community's faith in this process. Thank you. I will stay on the line if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels. Does anybody have any questions? Do the board members have any questions for Grant Michaels? I did not hear any, so thank you for your time, Grant, and we're going to move on now. Next speaker is Lisa Morris.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome. If you would please state your name for the record.
Yes, it's Lisa Morris, and I am a neighbor in La Crescenta. And I, too, echo Grant Michaels' comments in that it doesn't fit in this neighborhood as far as design and even size. If you're telling us that there can't be anything done about the size, I will set that aside. But the design should mimic what La Crescenta is known for in its historical sense, that either it be a Spanish design or a craftsman design. And I'm not real sure why the architect didn't pick up on that, because if you drive around in the neighborhood and take a look at even some of the newer units that have been built, say, especially on Montrose, a lot of them do take that into account. And I do believe that is what the neighborhood wants. You got to realize that Rock Haven is just a couple blocks down. And having this big, boxy, square-looking thing, I mean, no offense to the architect, it just doesn't fit here in La Crescenta. That goes downtown in Glendale. So that's primarily what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morris. I do not see any other callers that are on my screen, but I'm going to give it a moment to see if IT will. All right, they've just let me know that there's no more calls. So with that, we are going to go back to Mr. Nazarian for a rebuttal. And Mr. Platt, he has 10 minutes, is that correct?
Yes, I believe it's at your discretion. You may not need that much.
Mr. Nazarian, you'll have time for a rebuttal. Please go ahead. You have the floor. You have a maximum of 10 minutes, but we do have time constraints because one of the board members needs to leave at 6:45. So if you would try to be concise with your comments, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Mr. Nazarian, are you there? Mr. Nazarian, are you there? I'm showing the line as green, which says that he's there, but he may have a delay like last time. We're going to give it a few. Yes.
I am here, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful. If you would please mute the background computer and television. You have the floor for a rebuttal, maximum 10 minutes. However, please be concise with your comments because one of our board members needs to leave at 6:45. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Just responding to the comments received from the neighbors. First of all, the architectural side and the design of the building is the result of the cooperation with the design studio group of the city of Glendale, which always I appreciated Mr. J. Platt comment for the design. After having maybe 3-4 times comment, this style of the architecture, it has been kind of approved or acceptable with the design studio group of the city of Glendale, which they are professional and expert for this design. So I responded to all the comments. And for the parking issue, in the neighborhood, maybe in the very close to our project, there is 11,000 square feet of the commercial building, which by the today code, that building will require 30 parking spaces, which they have only 4 parking spaces. I understand it's a grandfather situation, non-conforming building, but the burden of the shortage of the parking space for that commercial building is not enough us. The on-street parking spaces for the use for all the community. And I want to mention that if I go with the SB 1818 regulation, this project could be satisfied only with the 18 parking spaces, but we are providing 23 parking spaces. So that parking issue is, we are not asking any variance or any other thing. That project complies with all the zoning ordinance and state law. And the other, the design issue, we have to understand that the design and the lifestyle, it has been changed. And in the vicinity of this project, there are other, apartment or condominium projects, which one is in the corner of the Ramsdale and the Honolulu on the northeast side of the corner, which is on-grade parking space from the Honolulu Street, Honolulu level, but it maybe could be subterranean from in the rear of that. Our project is a 3-story building above a semi-subterranean garage with the podium level. It's about 24-inch above the street level. So that concerns, that comment is not acceptable, or is not, I can't see that comment. It's a reasonable thing. In this neighborhood, there are other projects. There is a senior housing, maybe about 200, 300 feet from our project, which is 100-unit senior housing. This project is complied with all the zoning Glendale zoning ordinance, and the height, as I mentioned, the top of the building parapet wall, it's about 35, 36 feet, which the zoning, allows 25 plus 12, 1 story or maximum 12 feet above the allowable height, which it gives me 37 feet height. That for the 2 feet height, it's only the stairway shaft and the elevator shaft that is projecting above the 36 feet, 37 feet height limit, which that elevator shaft and the stairway shaft, it sets back almost 20 feet from the building front line, 26 feet from the side building line.
Mr. Nazarian, you have about another. Mr. Nazarian, you have about another 1 minute. If you would wrap it up, please, because you only have about a minute left. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I want to tell that this project, it is complies with the zoning ordinance And based on the SB 1818, which is a state law, we are using all the incentives of the waivers, and we are not asking anything additional, what we are allowed to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Board members, do you have any other questions for the applicant?
None here.
Okay. Thank you. Then I'm going to go ahead and close the public portion. Mr. Nazarian, I'm going to put you on hold just in case if we need you for clarifications, we'll come back to you. Ms. Nukian, are you still with us? I had a question for you, if you are still with us.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. In regards to really the Design Review Board's preview, in regards to mass and scale, et cetera, in this case, we have a height limit that already has gone through a separate hearing, and that's clear as far as the number of stories. But my question is more of a technical one. Let's say, as one of the speakers brought up, instead of a straight parapet where they're straight, if the parapets, let's say, are angled, like mansard roofs, in which case, you end up softening the facade of the project, I assume that is within the preview of Design Review Board. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, again, the rule of thumb is the density cannot be reduced. That's of primary importance. The second thing, the FAR, and I don't think what you're saying would reduce FAR. The parking was the third concession, and then the height, which again, as long as you don't touch those three things and density, I think there's a range of things you can do to modify the project or condition the project rather.
I see. So let's say if a board member were to say, well, on the third floor, if you chop up one of the corners of the building and create a transition of a wedding cake sort of a design, in essence, that would be affecting the FAR, and that's not allowed. Is that correct?
Well, yes, if it's something that the applicant can design around, I think we would have to hear from the applicant. If they can design around that without affecting FAR or any of the other three, then it would be something the Design Review Board could definitely go into.
I see. And then let's say if instead of saying eliminate a bedroom, if you say, hey, shift the third floor back and let's say reduce the rear setback, let's say, I'm just coming up with an example where that chunk of building is shifted, let's say, away from a certain portion onto another portion without really affecting the FAR or total square footage of the building, that's something within the preview of our Design Review Board, I would imagine. Is that correct?
Yes, again, we would have to really be careful about that kind of stuff because, again, as I mentioned before, not only are we constrained by the density bonus law, but the Housing Accountability Act also constrains the city making a project infeasible, any residential project. So affordable projects get even more protections, but this is technically not an affordable project under the Housing Accountability Act. Which requires 20% affordable. But that's sort of a different point. What I'm trying to say is we have to just be careful when the Design Review Board has to be careful because these conditions might have domino effects on other things that the applicant could probably either say, yes, I can design around that and still make the project work or pencil out, or no. And so I think we'd have to do a little back and forth with the applicant on that.
Understood. Thank you so very much. I wanted to get those clarifications before, we went to the individual board members, just so everyone could have a point of reference. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So with that, I'm going to start our discussions internally here. Board Member Smith, you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you very much. So I reviewed the North Glendale Community Plan, as most of you all did, noted that it was adopted in 2011, read the 7 letters against, saw that 6 each of them mentioned parking, but 6 articulated a lot of other concerns and listened, of course, to the 4 speakers. When I studied the North Glendale Community Plan, I noted that it is a vision grounded in an understanding of what makes Glendale unique in comparison to other communities within Glendale and surrounding areas. I don't really see the design responding to the local context, which I will get to in a moment, as much as I would like to. The community plan also talks about preserving and enhancing neighborhood character, balancing land uses. I was a little disappointed not to see this be mixed use, but I'm entirely in favor of housing, and of course low-income housing is very commendable. I found an article by Patrick Sisson that is called "Why Do All Apartment Buildings Look the Same?" It has to do with the cost-driven goals, the cap rate, and the internal rate of return rather than the appearance. Also, having formulaic or reasonably formulaic floor plans can add to that. I was really disappointed with not the idea that this is entirely residential, but with its appearance. So the citywide principle in managing growth says encourage quality development that's sensitive to the surrounding context. And I don't see a big demonstration of that. I believe mixed use might be better within the neighborhood context, but I think that ship has sailed. I would like it to respect the established visual character of the neighborhood a great deal more. I think that open space is sort of meager, and it's not really substantially usable unless you were a cat and someone could pick you up and put you in a raised planter. The open space, other than at the street, doesn't really break up the massing as described in the well-crafted staff report. It doesn't really maximize the amount of landscaping as it should. I see that the rear planter is 3 feet 2 inches wide, and we're recommending giant trees in it, so I'm not quite sure how that would work. I see that the landscaping shows creeping fig as a ground cover, and it's invasive. I think most of us have seen it lift foundations and so forth. I don't think it's a great choice for that. The recommendation that the gutters and downspouts be painted to match, I think, are silly in that it should be a factory applied finish if that is indeed a condition. I was truly disappointed not to see the lighting plan included. It's not a new requirement. The kicking it down the road, saying work with staff, it defers the review and circumvents the DRB's whatever authority we have entirely. I don't think an application should be considered complete without the lighting plan or anything else that's required. I don't think it's complete. So without it, I don't think it should be just a condition to work with staff, because that removes it from DRB's purview. I can move ahead. I see in the staff report, it's called a simple structure with a rectangular footprint, which I would call boxy, sort of unimaginative, not really articulated or well animated. It lacks interest. There are things in there are actual words in the community plan that recommends against boxy buildings, which I think this is a good example of. I don't think it's entirely consistent with the North Glendale Community Plan, especially the Verdugo City Village Center. But it's not impossible. It's mostly window dressing. It does seem very large for the site. I would hope that some of the units could be reduced in size to reduce the size of the giant box. The 3-story boxy design isn't really integrated with the surrounding community. it is not a consistent architectural concept with the community. It is only with itself. These design guidelines talk about earth tones and not using dark colors. And this, I don't consider yellow an earth tone. And there are blacks and browns, which are going to get super hot. In the staff report, it says it's somewhat larger than other things in the neighborhood, which I guess means 50 to 100% larger, which I would consider substantially larger. The mandatory concession to me is somewhat unfortunate in that it is a pretty low-scale neighborhood. There is nothing on that block that's 3 stories. The single-family homes behind it will lose some of their privacy. I saw that there's a swimming pool immediately behind it, which I can't imagine balconies looking into. I noted that on the surrounding block, there are minimal traditional, vernacular, all different things, and 2 arts and crafts buildings from 1919. And I think the contemporary style is not really trying to get along with the rest of the block. It's a little showy. To me, it ends up being bland and minimal, pretty boxy design. In one of the scholarly articles I read, they called it accepting mediocrity. I hope that we don't do that. I believe the architect could reduce the apparent mass based on the appearance, not just filling the box with as many units as possible. I don't think it should be ubiquitous and contemporary. Merely meeting the code is not the entire goal. So I would hope that the goals of the Glendale Community Plan could be satisfied while providing affordable housing and achieving the builder's goal, just doing a better job of the architecture, because I think it's just really minimal and calls too much attention to itself in that community. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Smith. Board Member Welsh, can you go next, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. Okay, so I'm not sure that I agree that it is boxy. I think that it is certainly rectilinear and you know, has lots of sharp edges. But if anything, I was going to complain about the fact that I thought that especially the front facade was a little busy with just lots of different shapes and articulations there. I think that, you know, generally I have some likes and I have some dislikes. I do think that the architect has done, you know, a reasonable job breaking up the mass, you know, having some different levels of fenestration and you know, depth and sort of surface cladding materials that are trying to break up the massing a bit. And the fact that it is set back, you know, further than most of the retail buildings on the street, so it will be set back a little bit. So those things will somewhat diminish the massiveness of it, but at the same time, it will be a pretty sizable project in comparison with its surroundings. And I recognize, you know, there's very little that we can do about that. So I really want to just focus in on those things that maybe we can do. Personally, a modern design, I generally have no objection to a modern design unless it is absolutely out of keeping with a very profound and predominant design aesthetic within the surrounding area. And I don't find that here. I think there's a wide variety of different design aesthetics in this neighborhood. And so on that basis, I don't feel comfortable imposing my design aesthetic on top of, you know, the owners or the architects. My goal would be to try to have the design be true to itself, to be, you know, in keeping with the guidelines and, you know, trying its best to blend in and make itself less obtrusive, given that we are restrained in terms of the density. So I want to just cut right to the chase here and try to see if I can make some suggestions that would make it a more palatable thing for me. First of all, I think staff did an excellent job with all of the concessions, all the conditions. The only one that I want to really talk about here is number 7, where they're talking about removing that lift and, or creating ramping. And what I would suggest instead is that we actually see if we can get the whole building lowered by, 16, 18, 20 inches, so that it's basically a straight ramp from the street, from the sidewalk to the front entranceway. We don't need the lift. Grant Michael's suggestion was appropriate there, that I think that if you could just drop the whole thing down a little bit, it can eliminate that lift, and it will also lower the height just a tad bit. Secondly, I think that the staff's recommendation about the courtyard, I think, is correct. I think having a central courtyard there like that and bringing natural light into the center of it is very good. And if they can, feasibly make it larger, I think that would be good. I don't know how successful it can be done as a condition, but I'm prepared to leave that in there. And then I think the one thing I was going to talk about, and Mr. Chair, you asked specifically this question about trying to take that third story, or at least the 2 units on the upper left and upper right of that third floor, if we could have maybe pushed those back a little bit, and tried to, maybe have it a little bit set back, and in particular removing those big boxy parapet structures that are sitting on top of those third floor balconies. That could work really well to help, step it back a little bit, ameliorate that massing right there on the front. So that would be what I would try to suggest. I don't know whether we can make a condition on that. I'm open to discussing that and seeing if there's some way that we can do that to, maybe set that back a couple of feet, 3 feet, and that would not be too adverse to the design or to the FAR. I do note that the project as it is proposed has a 1.44 FAR, so that is 0.04 above what was actually allowed. So I think that we have a little bit of discretion there. And so that is what I would recommend we try to do if possible. And then finally, several of the speakers talked about, a predominant feature within the area about river rocks, and it was in a lot of the letters. And I would suggest or make a recommendation that we put a consideration in there, that the architect come up with some potential way to incorporate that, because it is, if you go drive up and down the street there, you'll see lots of that embedded into walls, facade veneers. So I would make a consideration that the architects think about a way that he could possibly incorporate that in some way that is still true to the design, but would also somewhat speak to the neighborhood. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Board Member Welsh, for those great comments. We're going to move on to Board Member Arzumanyan. And I know she has to run afterwards, and so I think she's going to make her comments, and then she'll have to recuse herself and go, and we'll kind of take her comments into consideration.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I kind of agree with the comments that Mr. Welsh made. I support the modification to number 7 specifically. Just a quick comment. I do actually appreciate the architect and how, the design was brought together. Again, the modern design, you start to see them more and more in Glendale and everywhere else. I do walk by this property every morning on my morning walk, and I was very glad to see a, design review sign, and that is going to be a project built, especially if it's, in this case, we have affordable housing units. That's great. So I appreciate that. I do support the project, and again, thanks to staff, the conditions are very well thought of, and will obviously improve the project with a little bit of modification if it can make to the conditions. As mentioned, I do support with the modification to number 7, as previously board member mentioned. And those are my comments for now. I do support the colors. It's just the design. For me, it works and it comes together. And if in Montrose we do see a couple of modern designs that are recently built, and it works in my own opinion. And I do want to stay true to the design and what has been created here. And given that our in this particular case, we're limited to what we can say and do to this project, I think it's well put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Arjamanian. I appreciate all the community members that took the time to call in via telephone, et cetera. We know it's not as easy as coming in here and sitting in the boardroom, and so we appreciate your patience on it. I also appreciate all the board members that made these comments, because I believe a lot of them are spot on, and I also appreciate the review that staff has done. I think staff did a wonderful job. The conditions are very well thought out, as Board Member Welsh indicated. I think when we start to assess a project in the Montrose area, more specifically off of Honolulu, we all realize that that's a very special part of our community. It has its own really design guidelines. There are a lot of specific suggestions in there in regards to sort of materials to use, as Board Member Welsh brought up, but others as well, such as really the use of more conservative building materials. It doesn't say you have to go with a more of a conservative style, but it says, it comes up with examples of materials to use. So let's say if you're going to use horizontal siding, you could use smooth horizontal siding. You could integrate it with maybe a metal roof, but you use earth tone colors, and in a sense you create more of a contemporary, let's say, craftsman style, or a contemporary, let's say, Spanish style. Whatever the case may be, you have these hindrances of classical materials. You could have deep overhangs. You could end up having articulation with your windows, detailing, the way you do your planners, the way you integrate the grade differences you do with garden walls that are perhaps have stone veneers on them, that have the river rock, etc. So a general language can be incorporated into a building, even in a very contemporary manner, that still has reminiscences of the true Montrose feel. And so then that building becomes much more compatible. In regards to this project, what I will, instead of rehashing and going over what board members have said, I'm just going to kind of provide some solutions or some thoughts that I think I would be in favor of discussing with my board members. I do concur that the subterranean garage can perhaps be pushed further in and so provide a more level entrance into the building and eliminate the lift. Now, is that a must? No. The lift could be repositioned elsewhere, staff has indicated, and you could very easily integrate a very nice ramp, as I described earlier, with these kind of garden walls, etc., and have a very local drought-tolerant landscape system integrated into that ramp. So I'd be in favor of either one of those. The entrance needs to, of course, be emphasized, but I would kind of work with that entrance and really follow it all the way up in the facade of the building. I think that the trellises add unnecessary mass and bulk, especially the one fronting Honolulu or closer to Honolulu. I think the farther back trellises go, the less they'll be visible, frankly, from either the alley or from the street. So I think that's kind of a no-brainer in trying to reduce mass. The elevations depict in a true manner the elevator of the building, and hence the 42-foot height, but the elevator is almost in the center of the building, and you're just really not going to see that elevator tower from Honolulu unless you're way across the street, nor are you going to easily see it from the alley. So I'm not as concerned about the elevator height, but I think the trellis closer to the street should certainly be eliminated and moved back. I also think that we have an opportunity to really follow along and maybe more of a mansard roof or maybe more of a, well, mansard is really the only way I could describe it at the moment, and eliminate the straight parapets, which really have no function. The planter around the common open space on the roof could certainly be a mansard thing, which would provide the life and safety of a guardrail, but at the same time create more of a softer edge to the roof, as Mr. Michaels indicated. In regards to the courtyard, I'm not opposed to enlarging it. I think at the moment it's neither a closed corridor nor an open one. It's something in the middle, and I'm not sure how it's going to work out, because sometimes if you put an opening that's too small like it is right now, it just ends up being somewhat awkward, and I think that's what staff is pointing at. In regards to the materials, I do think that overall, I don't have particularly an issue with the stucco, nor with the siding, nor with the window colors, but I would just say, again, if we have more earth tone colors, maybe instead more of a traditional, let's say, siding system instead of this kind of stained wood or whatever we have here, because the colors that I have right now, it's kind of hard to tell, but it looks like one of the more contemporary stained siding. I think if you kind of go with more of a subtle green color or a darker green or the earth tones, all of a sudden that changes the tone of that building. The yellow accent wall, I think similarly, you start going with more of a wheat yellow or something that's more in line with natural earth tone colors will help. So I'm much more in line of repositioning the entrance to have more of a proper residential entrance and veer away from a commercial look. I'm for relocating the ADA ramp, of course, and integrating either a ramp in the front or lowering the parking structure. I already talked about how we could eliminate mass and bulk on the roof deck level. And I believe the elevations can use some additional work. They are, although they're meeting the setback, exceeding the setback requirements, but then again, there's straight walls going up. And so those are cost factors, right? You have a straight wall, it's going to be much less expensive to build. On the other hand, there are things that you can do to soften up those, three-story walls. So those would be some conditions I'd also support as well. And so those are my thoughts. I think in general, I heard an overall, at least for most of the conditions, most board members thought the conditions were a good starting point. I think we've already discussed number 7. We've added some additional conditions, or talked about additional conditions, I should say. So with that, I'm going to have Mr. Platt actually chime in with some thoughts.
Okay, before I kind of try to go through all my notes and recap the discussion, I just wanted to share a concern that I have that I only realized that I have right now, which is changing the size of the courtyard could have an impact on FAR. And Mr. Welch did note that we have 0.04 extra to play with. I'm not sure if the courtyard would be the best place to do that in terms of bang for buck, in terms of modulating the massing. So if you guys could discuss that or think about that as part of your discussion. But I'm kind of a little concerned about that staff recommendation now and wonder if it shouldn't just be eliminated. But okay. I'll see where you go with that.
On two thoughts. On the courtyard comment, if the courtyard gets bigger, it would reduce one of the, let's say, side setbacks.
It could, yes.
It could. Mm-hmm. And in so doing, would that, have any consequences from what's already been entitled? Because they haven't asked for any setback concessions.
No, we definitely could move setbacks. The question there is, as we review projects, we look more at the exterior envelope and how it affects neighboring properties and the
Than the
public that's
interior.
experiencing the building. We looked at this courtyard and none of us felt comfortable with it as a concept. We also recognize that when designers choose to make decisions on the insides of projects that may affect their marketability, that's where our design review purview kind of ends, and they're just let the market go where it goes. We could, if the board is interested in expanding the courtyard, you're correct. We could move setbacks around. I believe there's enough room, and Mr. Nazarian might have some thoughts on that if you wanted to double check with him, but I'm sure it could work.
And then as a clarification, FAR that was allowed in the former concessions is 1.4. What's being proposed at the moment?
No, what's allowed is 1.2, and they're proposing to increase it to 1.4.
But that 1.4 was already approved via the
Yes,
SB 1818
that's
concessions.
correct.
In which case we don't have the wiggle room that Mr. Welch noted. We actually have to eliminate that 0.04. So we'll have to look at the drawings carefully and work with the architect.
That was my
Yeah.
question, is it going to 0.04 in the positive or negative, and how many square feet do we have to play with? But it seems as though,
We have 0 to play with right now.
okay.
Going through the notes, I'll kind of start at the beginning. Board Member Smith mentioned a few issues that some of which got picked up by others and some didn't. The creeping fig at the rear, she finds to be the wrong landscape material for that. So that's at this point kind of an open issue. Downspouts and gutters, I believe in our staff report when we used painted, that was just kind of a euphemism. I think we would expect those to be installed, and I'm sure most builders would want that to be installed with a factory finish, but we could definitely clarify that if the board would like. The lighting plan, it is unfortunately a typical condition. It's often kind of something that doesn't get thrown into the mix on many projects. But for the public and for Board Member Smith, we are changing our submittal requirements for projects, and we're kind of in the process of transitioning into that. We're going to have a very intense list of submittal requirements, and we're not going to move projects forward through our process without those. It's a shift from how we've done business over the years. So I think that type of issue is going to be addressed as we move further into that new process. I believe there is overall support for the modern design of the building and for its appropriateness in the community. And I would hesitate, it's not that this is, we heard, I was part of the team when we were doing the North Glendale Community Plan, and we heard a lot of concern about Starship Verdugo and kind of very radical modern designs. But to Mr. Michael's comment about the Pennsylvania project, we thought that was a successful use of modern design with cladding materials and some building forms that really softened that. And that met with the community's approval and the board's approval. The project on Honolulu, also on the Honolulu facades, had what I would call a modern design that also was softened through the use of materials. So I do think I heard support from the board that the materials that are proposed are acceptable. There's a staff condition to increase their distribution to change the ratio of stucco to, say, wood siding. Looking at the design and hearing the comments about the corners of the building, I see that as a possible location for additional siding at the corners, and then playing with the parapets and seeing if we can push back any aspect of those areas to kind of have some stepping at that area. Going back to the condition number 7 about the entrance, that's kind of a multi-part condition. So there was discussion about lowering the entire building, therefore eliminating the need for a lift. And there seemed to be strong support for that in general, but not a complete consensus. I think there is a consensus that whatever happens at the entrance, it become more entrance-like, become more of a prominent feature of the facade to indicate its presence as the entrance. We had as I just mentioned, the idea of trying to find a way to break up the massing at particularly the corners by perhaps dropping the parapet heights or perhaps even moving walls if that's doable under the 1818 and the density bonus agreement. We had a mention of trying to incorporate river rock into the design, which is sometimes hard with a more contemporary looking design, but there have been plenty of examples where it's done, so I'm sure we can work that out. And I'm continuing down my list. We have some discussion of the garage, emphasize the entrance. Mr. Simonian, I was a little confused when you were mentioning trellises at the front facade. I don't see those on the drawing. Can you guide me toward that?
I believe it's on the roof deck. Is that correct, Mr. Simonian?
Correct. So like sheet 8C as in Charlie, the southwest elevation depicts that trellis.
Oh, just up at the roof. Okay.
Up on the roof, correct. And if you look at the roof plan, you could easily shift the trellises away from the Honolulu side onto, let's say, the middle portion of the roof. Provide shade, but then reduce massing along the street.
Okay, so we'll have well, the board can discuss a condition to push the trellis further back from the street facade. There was discussion of incorporating a mansard roof rather than the flat parapet, just based on staff's experience with that. When we do it on, as Mr. Welsh noted, a rectilinear building, we often get a very not a wedding cake, but the icing on the cake. We get a very superficial treatment that doesn't respond very well to the articulations that I think were met with approval by the board. It's possible to do that in certain locations. For example, if it were possible to eliminate the parapets at the corners, perhaps a hipped roof could be invoked at that location, perhaps at other locations around the property, rather than a mansard that wraps the entire building.
It would achieve the same purpose.
To just have it in specific locations? Or?
No, like you described, even at the corners, what it would do is it would soften the corners up, would reduce the verticality, and at the same time really reduce the mass of the building.
Okay, so that...
Yeah, I think if we could do that at the corners and eliminate those boxy protrusions above those third floor balconies, that would go a long way towards helping that.
Okay, let me add the balconies. We'll reduce the height of the, I guess, the fascias over the balconies. Would you like to see that feature incorporated anywhere else along the design? I think those boxy aspects are just at the front facade. The rear facade does have very flat corners or very squared off corners. Would that be something to look at the rear facade also?
I would think so. I think if the language is integrated into the design, you would kind of go around the project and treat the similar corner settings in a similar manner.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that alley is fairly public, so it is a de facto street that this facade would be visible from.
Okay, very good. We discussed the courtyard, and so it would be good for staff to have a final kind of thought on that from the board. And then we heard from Mr. Simonian to use the siding material rather than one of these synthetic wood-grained type materials, to use, I assume, something more like a hardy material or another synthetic cementitious product, perhaps, that's more traditional in scale and look, and then can be
It was an idea. It's more intended to start a discussion.
All right.
If that's the direction we're going, it certainly would be more conducive towards the North Glendale plan.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think it would be, and I think using some more traditional colors, systems, and earth tone colors would be beneficial to the project, and I think would help it if you did incorporate some kind of that river rock in there. I think that would help, blend those better.
Okay, and in terms of the river rock, would that be just at the base of the building, or possibly?
I don't want to. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dictate that in particular, but if it could be incorporated in some way that is well designed, that is, the extent at which I would recommend it. But maybe Mr. Simonian has some more detailed suggestions.
Yes, and in fact, I think what I'd like to also dovetail this into just one more item that Ms. Nukian had brought up. SB 1818 project is what we're considering, and of course, one of the concessions has already been granted, which is height and a specific height limit. And so it seems there's a general consensus to lower the parking structure and to provide a more harmonious direct entrance off of Honolulu. Now, if that creates conflict with SB 1818, with the attorney's office, or anything else that staff feels it creates conflict with, then of course we would provide a second idea, which as Board Member Welsh has described, which is the ramp system to provide access. Now, if we're putting ramps in the front setback, then it's a perfect opportunity to integrate River Rock veneer, because in a sense you're creating these garden walls, etc., and then you could really continue that and apply it even to some of the aspects of the subterranean garage that's popping up, where instead of a 4'6" subterranean that surfaces or whatever the number is, it might be less, but there's still a portion of it. So that's what I would suggest as a solution for that thought.
And even if they if the board chooses to ask for the pushing the building down to lower the elevation at the entry, River Rock could still be incorporated at the front through raised planters or terrace kind of stepped planters toward from the street to the building.
Right. It's more important that it's depicted in the front than, let's say, in the inside, because obviously we're trying to keep that harmonious, natural feel from the street facade.
And so in terms of pushing the building down, we'll double check with the city attorney's office. I personally don't see any issues in terms of the concessions that have been granted. It's not changing any floor area or any of the other aspects. It is technically reducing the height of the building, which could then, since the height has already been approved, could be addressed in other ways. We'll discuss the ramifications of that.
Yeah. That's why I think it's good to have that what if, right? The second release mechanism that then doesn't have to kick it back to DRB.
Yeah, we'll avoid those unintended consequences. I believe that fairly long list was everything that I've jotted down here, unless I missed anything.
Mm-hmm. Fairly comprehensive list. Board members, I guess we could either entertain a motion, and in that motion, if any conditions have been left out, then a board member could include it to see if there's support for it.
So just to recap, so it sounds like we've added conditions for the trellis to move it back, to adjust the parapet design aspect with more of an angled, mansard or hip roof kind of style at all four corners of the building instead of the straight parapets. A condition to change the color scheme and or siding systems to be more traditional and or of earth tone colors. And finally, the adjustment that we talked about to condition number 7 to lower the building by a sufficient height to create a level entranceway. Of the other elements of condition number 7 to be left intact about creating a more monumental entryway there. And putting the proviso that if the city attorney says that we can't do that because it would violate the state law, that we would allow them to do some kind of a ramping system to ameliorate that. Is that correct?
Well said, Board Member Welsh.
Yes, okay. there were a couple of other things that I had added, but they're relatively minor. I think those are the big ones, and then I think I've got everything.
Okay, so along those lines, I will move the motion to approve with the conditions.
That was a motion by Board Member Welch. Do I have a second?
Board Member Arjumanian, are you still with us by any chance?
I don't think she is. This is Board Member Smith. I will second it to be a good sport. point of,
That's a second by Board Member Smith.
Uh-huh. And for the record, thank you, Board Member Smith. For the record, I'd like to just insert that Board Member Arzumanian left the meeting after her discussion points. Go ahead.
And that would be approved with condition. Roll call. Board Member Smith?
can you hear me? No.
Can one make a motion and then vote against?
Oh, it's happened in DRB in the last 2 months. Sure.
Is our city attorney still on the line?
Yes, I think that's fine.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nukian. So that was a no by Board Member Smith. Board Member Welch?
Yes.
Board Member Arzumanian has left, and Chairperson Simonian.
Yes.
So the motion carries. Thank you. Approve with conditions.
Okay. Well, the applicant is still on the line, so with that, I'm going to just state that we're going to release the phone call. Thank you for holding. Do we have any minutes that we should review at this point?
No, we did that earlier at the
Okay.
beginning of the meeting, and I will have them available for you for your signature.
Great.
And I do not have any comments at this time, unless Mr. Platt has anything else to add.
Nope.
Then, does anybody want to
Mr.
move?
Chair?
Yes?
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
Okay, adjourned.
Bravo.